chapter 38. So starting in Genesis chapter 38 at verse 1 this morning. So as we all remember, we left off in Genesis chapter 37 last week. We were going over the story of Joseph and the coat of many colors, and his brothers were selling him into slavery to the Midianites, also called the Ishmaelites. But here in chapter 38, it's kind of an interjection. When we get to chapter 39, we'll go back to Joseph's story, but we're going to look at a story with Judah here in chapter 38. So it's kind of a standalone story it's kind of put in here that we can just look at. We can kind of put Joseph out of our head for now. So Genesis chapter 38, starting at verse 1. Genesis 38, verse 1. And it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brethren and turned into a certain Adullamite whose name was Hirah. So in that verse, the phrase, at that time, what that's trying to show us is this is taking place around the same time as what we saw in chapter 37 with Joseph being sold into slavery. So around that same time, this is taking place. And we see Judah meeting with Hirah, the Adullamite, and his name Hirah means nobility and hollowness. So verse 2, and Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and he went into her. Now the name Shua there is not of his wife, the woman he took. That is the name of the Canaanite, her father. So we need to remember that marriage with Canaanites was discouraged, okay? We saw this when Abraham insisted that Isaac not marry a Canaanite back in chapter 24. Okay, Isaac also objected to Esau's marriage with foreigners in chapter 27 and 28. And this is because of how it would bring false gods and religions into the mix, which we've already seen happening with Rachel and the different things. I have a verse here on the side that we can look at. We don't have to turn there, but just so we see it. This is Exodus chapter 34, verse 16 on the sides. And thou take of their daughters unto thy sons, and their daughters go a-whoring after their gods, and make thy sons go a-whoring after their gods. So laying out, that's what's going to happen. You start mixing with these people that believe in different religions and different gods, your people will start falling into that trap. Now, the Companion Bible notes that not following this order to not marry into the Canaanites was Judah's sin. So it specifically says this was one of Judah's biggest downfalls, was marrying a Canaanite woman. Well, why would this be? Why is that his biggest sin? So do we remember who the Canaanites are? We've talked about this all through Genesis starting back in chapter 6. The Canaanites were those that mixed with the Nephilim. They're mixed with the fallen angels, and it's part of Satan's plan to prevent the pure bloodline that was needed for the coming of Christ. So that's why it was so important that they not mix with the Canaanites. So that's why it's Judah's biggest sin, is he is directly going against the commandment that would keep that pure bloodline intact. So Genesis 38, verse 3. And she conceived and bare a son, and he called his name Now remember, these are going to be half Canaanite. This is coming from that woman that Judah married. Now we have a mistranslation in this verse. So if you look, it says, and she conceived and bare a son, and he called his name That should have been she. So it should have said, she called his name And means watcher or awake. That's what his name means there. Again, means watcher or awake. Verse 4, and she conceived again and bare a son, and she called his name Onan. Onan means iniquity and pain. And if you see here, this verse says she called his name Onan. That's how we know the prior verse was mistranslated, that it should have been referring to the Canaanite wife. Verse 5, and she yet again conceived and bare a son, so a third child, and called his name Shelah, and he was at Chezib when she bare him. Now Shelah means prayer, petition, and peace. Chezib is a city that's southwest of Adullam, so we can kind of place where it's at in the region. And that goes all the way back to verse 1. We saw that Judah was going to meet an Adullamite. So this shows us that they're still in that same region. They haven't left, they haven't traveled anywhere. So they're kind of staying in that same area. Verse 6. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. So Judah is picking out this wife for his son, and this is Tamar. Now, we've seen this earlier in Genesis. So we have to remember that that was the custom of the time, that the father would choose the bride for his son. Now, we've got a couple of things we're going to look at as we go through this chapter. You will hear a lot of teachers, scholars, preachers that will argue that Tamar was a Canaanite. But we've seen all through Genesis, God keeps intervening to keep the Canaanites from mixing so we have the pure bloodline. So she's not a Canaanite, and we can prove that by looking at a couple of different things. First, we know about God's intervention to keep that lineage pure for Christ. This won't be any different. Second, her name Tamar. That name Tamar means a palm tree, to stand upright. Now, the palm would become symbolic for Israel and Judah. The palm frond symbolized eternal life. And think about the palm branches being tied to Christ's arrival into Jerusalem. We still see that celebrated to this day on Palm Sunday. So a palm is directly tied to symbolism for Christ. So from her name, God is showing us that the pure lineage that Christ would need would come through her. And the Bible never once says that she's a Canaanite. So a little later, we're going to look at a few other pieces of evidence to prove that as well. Verse 7. And Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. Now, just reading that verse as it stands, it's probably pretty hard to understand, right? Judah's firstborn, he marries a Canaanite woman, and that's bad enough for God to kill him. We have to think about what this is trying to tell us here. We're not told exactly what he did, but what we do know is he married outside of what was commanded for the descendants of Abraham by mixing with the Canaanites. Remember the verse we just looked at in Exodus. And we also have examples of what's happened to the other firstborn in this seed line when they didn't follow God's commandments or decided to give up their inheritance. So, now you got to come with me. We know that Cain was not the son of Adam, but he was the son of Eve, so he was still of that bloodline, and he was the first murderer and was exiled. Ishmael was excluded from the covenant and would be the father of the 12 Arabic tribes that are constantly in conflict. Esau gave up his inheritance and was then excluded from being the son that the promised seed would come through. So over and over, we see the firstborn of this family failing to take the responsibility they're supposed to have. So this family started with the man Adam, right? And down through the 12 tribes of Israel and continuing to the birth of Jesus, they have a special purpose in God's plan. And because of that, there's a certain level of responsibility that they're supposed to take on as well. And over, we see the consequences of them failing to follow that plan. Now remember, this does not say that was killed just for being the firstborn of a Canaanite mother. Okay, it says that he was wicked. Look at the verse there. He was wicked in the sight of the Lord. Now, we don't know exactly what he did, but the Bible tells us he's wicked and God slew him. We just have to believe what the Bible tells us. We have to take it in its full conception of what it's trying to tell us there with him being evil. Now, the purity of the seed line, making sure that we get to Jesus, is literally a matter of life and death for every single person that has ever lived. That is the stakes here. So we have to think, are we willing to, would I give up my life in the flesh if it saves everyone's eternal souls? I hope that we could all try to answer yes to that, right? So as harsh as that sounds that the Lord slew him, remember what's at stake here. And I have a couple verses to kind of lay that out for us. This is Matthew chapter 10, verse 39. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. Okay? Then Mark 8:35. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the same shall save it. John 12, verse 25. He that loveth his life shall lose it, and he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it until life eternal. And then Luke 9:24. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever will lose his life for my sake, the same shall save it. So the concept of eternal life being the end goal, being more important than our life in the flesh, is so important that it's recorded in all four Gospels. So when we study the Bible, whether it's this chapter or in 6 months when we're in a different book, we have to remember what is at stake. What is the end goal? This is not just stories about a family and, he married this person he wasn't supposed to and was put. The end goal was Christ and the salvation of all of our souls for eternity. So that will help us understand some of these hard verses when we think about what is at stake here. So Genesis chapter 38, verse 8. And Judah said unto Onan, Go in unto thy brother's wife, and marry her, and raise up seed to thy brother. Okay, so she's married the firstborn. He's been slain. And now the father's saying to his secondborn, now you go and marry her and bring up seed in your brother's name. Now, in the U.S. in 2025, this probably seems like a very weird concept, right? Now, we have to think about the day and age that we're talking about here. So, If any of you study with the Companion Bible Appendix 15 is an appendix that goes over the laws before Sinai. Okay? Now, what this appendix tells us is that the existence of laws in the book of Genesis and Exodus are evident, even though there's no formal record of their delivery. So, no doubt that some of these laws were made known to mankind through God. We know about the laws of Sabbath. We see that in Genesis chapter 2. And the days noted in connection with the flood are all Sabbaths, so we know that they were observing these things. The law of the place to worship shows up in Genesis chapter 4 in 3 different places, in verse 3, verse 4, and verse 16. And then the law of offerings shows up in Genesis chapter 4 in verse 4. So we know that they're observing some laws, even though it's not formally written down. But side by side with these special divine communications, the Babylonian laws were codified in the age of Abraham as well. So I have a note here. In 1901, so in the year 1901, the Code of Amraphel, or Hammurabi, we'll actually see this in Genesis 14, verse 1, that these were discovered in Susa by M.J. De Morgan, and the latest date for this code is 2139 BC. So this is a written code of laws that we found that the latest it was in 2139 BC. So, and the Code of Amraphel is directly referenced in the Bible. I have the verse here. It's Genesis 14:1. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, and Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations. I'm sure I butchered that pronunciation, but you gotta just work with me, guys. So 800 years before Moses, these laws, we know them as the Code of Hammurabi, the Code of Hammurabi, or Amraphel. They governed the peoples of the Persian Gulf all the way to the Caspian Sea, and from Persia to the Mediterranean. So all throughout Canaan, they were following these laws. Now, the discovery of these written laws overthrew 2 main pillars of a lot of the higher critics. One, which is that the writing was unknown before Moses, and that there was no legal code before the Jewish kings. Well, we see they were following laws before that period, right? And now we have both codes, and we can answer the question in Deuteronomy 48, what nation is so great that hath statutes and judgments so righteous as all this law which I set before you this day? The Jews were following a law. That's why he's going to go into his sister, or his sister-in-law rather, and have children that would be his brothers. It's part of this law. So Hammurabi calls his laws the judgment of the righteous, but some of them in that law were unrighteous and unequal. That's why we don't follow that code to this day. If it was God's law in the Bible, we'd probably still be following it now. But this was just the law of the land, not biblical law. But we're going to look at Deuteronomy 25 here, because we see that the Bible tells us about this law and that they were following it. So Deuteronomy 25:5, I have it here on the slide, so we don't necessarily have to turn to it if you don't want to. It says, if brethren dwell together, and one of them die, and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger. So don't marry a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her, and take her to him to wife, and perform the duty of an husband's brother unto her. Now verse 6. And it shall be that the firstborn which she beareth shall succeed in the name of his brother which is dead, that his name be not put out of Israel. So the brother goes into the sister-in-law, they become man and wife, but their first child is not considered that man's. It would be his deceased brother's. That way the lineage continues on. Verse 7. And if the man like not to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gates unto the elders, and say, my husband's brother refuseth to raise up unto his brother a name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. Then the elders of the city shall call him, and speak unto him, and if he stand to it, and say, I like not to take her, in verse 9 here, then shall his brother's wife come unto him in the presence of the elders, and loose his shoe from off his foot, and spit in his face, and shall answer and say, so shall it be done unto the man that will not build up his brother's house. And his name shall be called in Israel, the house of him that hath his shoe loosed. So this was something they were supposed to be doing, right? They're breaking this law. So that's why we see what's happening with and Onan here. They are following the law of the time. And we see this law referenced even in other scriptures. We'll see it referenced in Ruth and in Matthew as well. So back to where we're at here in Genesis. Genesis 38, verse 9. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his, and it came to pass, when he went into his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest that he should give seed to his brother. So Onan, knowing that the child wouldn't be considered his, reveals his selfish motives, right? This would be an offense against his brother. He's not willing to bring up his seed, and that would result in the end of his brother's lineage. So keeping this on an adult level, let's think about what this is telling us. We all know that there's two things that have to happen for a child. We have to have the egg and the seed, right? So think about what it's telling us here. It doesn't say that he refused to go into his brother's wife. He did that part. But the seed is spilled on the ground so that she wouldn't bring forth children. So it is showing very selfish motives. He is okay with the fun parts of this. He just doesn't want to bring up his brother's children, right? He doesn't want to continue that lineage. So keep in mind what we've just looked at about the stakes of what's going on here, that it's about the eternal salvation of everyone, and how evil this can come across, that he's willing to be an offense to his brother, to break the law that they're living under. So maybe we'll understand this verse a little easier. So 38 verse 10. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore he slew him also. So now he's been put to death as well. So the word that's used here for displeased in the Hebrew, I have a slide here for us. If you use a Strong's Concordance, it's Hebrew word 7489, ra'ah, means to do evil, to do harm, to punish. So Onan was doing evil. He broke the law. He didn't follow what he was supposed to do. It was an offense to his brother. He done away with that lineage. And so God is putting him to death. Again, going back to we've got to preserve this bloodline for Christ. So verse 11. Then said Judah to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow at thy father's house, till Shelah my son be grown. For he said, lest peradventure he die also, as his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. So we can see that Judah's concerned that Shelah would die also, right? He's already lost 2 sons marrying this woman, so it makes sense. And he might be showing here that he understands a little bit about what's causing the death of his sons. So Tamar would have been dependent on her husband or her sons during this time period. You didn't have women that were able to go and work and have their own household. They were dependent on men during this time. So this is why she's sent home to her father. She's got to go somewhere where she'll be safe and taken care of. So Judah sends her back to be with her father. Verse 12. And in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. And Judah was comforted and went up unto his sheep shearers in Timnath, he and his friend Hirah the Adullamite. So in the process of time in that verse, that means that a long period has passed. So a long period has passed, and Judah, now this is not the daughter-in-law Tamar, this is Judah, his wife has died. Now he's going to the springtime shearing of the sheep. Now think about what we do like around harvest time. We have the pecan fest and things of that nature. So this springtime shearing of the sheep, this would have been a feast and a celebration. They're kind of getting together like we kind of do to this day. So he's probably going there, he's grieving, he's lost his wife. It's probably a welcome distraction. He's going to have a little bit of fun. He's going to hang out with his friend Hirah the Adullamite and get his mind off of losing his wife. Verse 13. And it was told Tamar, so someone tells the daughter-in-law that's waiting on the 3rd son to come of age, behold, thy father-in-law goeth up to Timnath to shear his sheep. So a long period of time's passed, and Judah hasn't been true to his word. He hasn't arranged for Tamar and Shelah to wed. And hearing that Judah's headed to Timnath, Tamar's going to seize on this opportunity to take matters into her own hands. So verse 14. And she put her widow's garments off from her, and covered her with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place, which is by the way to Timnath, for she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him to wife. So Tamar's not wearing a veil as a religious symbol here. She's not worshiping some god. She's putting on a veil to conceal her identity. And in an open place means in the entrance to Enem. Enem is a town that would be on the way to Timnath. So she knows the route that she thinks that Judah's going to take. She's kind of lying in wait for him and concealing her identity. Verse 15. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be an harlot because she had covered her face. So this shows us Judah is not aware of who she is. She has concealed her identity. He just thinks that she's a common harlot. Verse 16. And he turned unto her by the way, and said, Go to, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee, for he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, What wilt thou give me, that thou mayest come in unto me? So Tamar is playing the part of the harlot, and asking Judah what's going to be the payment. So she is playing the part to a T, and asking for payment for services that are going to be rendered here, right? We all understand where we're at here. So verse 17, and he said, I will send thee a kid from the flock. And she said, wilt thou give me a pledge till thou send it? So Judah doesn't have anything to pay her. He doesn't have anything with him, no money, nothing. So this kind of shows us that this was not a planned activity. This was something that just happened by impulse, right? So Tamar's asking for collateral in lieu of the goat. She's saying, hey, you've got to leave something with me so I know that you're going to pay me. Now in the next verse, she's going to deliberately ask for something personal that's going to identify who she's dealing with. And Judah doesn't think anything of it. He doesn't consider this harlot to be someone that could humiliate him. So we're going to see that come back to bite him. Verse 18. And he said, what pledge shall I give thee? And she said, thy signet and thy bracelets and thy staff that is in thine hand. And he gave it to her and came in unto her, and she conceived by him. So not only do they consummate here, but she's actually going to become pregnant. And she's got these items that he's left, right? Now we see it says thy signet. Now this can mean two different things, but it doesn't change the purpose here. The signet can be a cylinder seal. Now a cylinder seal is a small oval-shaped object that you wore that had a personal sign or name that you'd use almost like, Aunt Mary, you're a notary public, your stamp. It's going to show who you are. So this is something very similar to that, and it would have had a hollow in it where they could wear it on a cord around their neck like a necklace. Or sometimes they would make it into a signet ring. We've probably all saw different movies where they'll put the melted wax on whatever paperwork they're sending. They use the signet ring to seal it. That's kind of what this would be, right? Now, we actually see from archaeological excavations, they found tens of thousands of these. So we know it was a common usage during that time. Now, the staff also is a symbol of leadership. In Numbers chapter 17, verse 2, we see that tribal leaders had their own staff and they're personalized. So Judah's staff was also probably personalized in a way that would identify him. So she's got several things that's going to identify who she was with here. Verse 19. And she arose and went away and laid by her veil from her and put on the garments of her widowhood. So Tamar returns to her former life. She conceals her deception. And at the right time, she's going to reveal what's occurred. Now, Tamar is one of 9 widows that are mentioned in the Bible. Now, 9 in biblical numerics means finality of judgment. It always shows up as a reference to judgment. So just keep that in mind. It gives us a little bit of foreshadowing of what's going on with Judah here. Verse 20. And Judah sent the kid by the hands of his friend the Adullamite, probably Hirah, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he found her not. So Judah tries to send payment and tries to retrieve his items back from Tamar, but she can't be found. She's not posing as a harlot anymore, and he didn't know her identity, so they can't find her. Verse 21. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, where is the harlot that was openly by the wayside? And they said, there was no harlot in this place. And he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. And also the men of the place said that there was no harlot in this place. Verse 23. And Judah said, let her take it to her, lest we be shamed. Behold, I sent this kid, and thou hast not found her. So in their culture, public shame was to be avoided at all costs. So Judah being outwitted by a common harlot would have been a major disgrace. So he's saying, well, hopefully, let's just put it out of the way and nothing comes of this. Verse 24. And it came to pass about 3 months after that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar, thy daughter-in-law, hath played the harlot, and also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, bring her forth and let her be burnt. Okay? So she's had a child out of wedlock that's not from my son that she's supposed to marry, that she's not married to because he didn't arrange it. So now he's wanting her to be burnt. So those that have studied Genesis 14 with us, think about what we've already seen with Melchizedek back then. Christ was called a priest after the order of Melchizedek, okay? So we know that Adamic people are already worshiping Yahweh at this time and had priests. They had, religious leaders. So Judah's punishment that he calls for against Tamar gives us a hint that she is not a Canaanite. Remember, I said there's a little more evidence that we'd have here, right? So more than likely, she comes from a family that was involved in the priesthood. We think she's probably descended from Shem. But this is another little piece of evidence that we see that she's not a Canaanite. I have a verse here from Leviticus 21:9. And the daughter of any priest, if she profane herself by playing the whore, she profaneth her father, she shall be burnt with fire. Now, does that not sound exactly like the punishment that Judah's trying to bring on Tamar? So again, giving us a little clue that she's not a Canaanite. She is from the tribes that would be descending from Adam through Abraham, and that's why he's trying to give her this punishment. So we've looked at a few pieces of evidence for Tamar's lineage. First, remember, the Bible never calls her a Canaanite. Second, her name translates to palm tree, which is a symbolic image of the lineage of Christ. Third, here, Judah prescribes a punishment used for the daughters of Hebrew priests. And then we also have evidence outside of the Bible that points to her not being a Canaanite. So the Genesis Rabbah and the Talmud state that Tamar was an Israelite. Now, this is probably a mistranslation. It's a little misleading because she wouldn't be descended from Israel, Jacob. But this is probably meaning she's descending from Abraham. She's part of that family. Now, if you're like, what are those things? The Genesis Rabbah is a religious text that's used from Judaism's classical period. It was written around 300 AD. And the Talmud is a central text of rabbinic Judaism, and it's the primary source of Jewish religious law and Jewish theology. The reason I bring that up is because we have books outside of the Bible that kind of agree with the Bible here, saying, hey, we may have differences in our beliefs, but we all agree Tamar was not a Canaanite. So nowhere in the Bible or any of these texts does it plainly say she's of the Adamic lineage. But if we connect all of these dots, we get a lot of evidence that she's probably not Canaanite. Now, you all have to draw your own conclusions there. There is no one verse that just says this thing. But we see that God always intervenes to keep that bloodline pure. He doesn't allow them to mix with the Canaanites. So let's put the evidence together there. Verse 25. When she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man whose these are, am I with child? And she said, discern, I pray thee, whose are these? The signet and bracelets and staff. So Tamar does not lie. She doesn't act deceptively. She tells Judah, yes, I'm pregnant, and then shows him the items and says, I'm pregnant by the man that these belong to, and asks him if he can identify these items. Now, as we know, she's aware who these belong to. So she's not asking for an answer. It's a hypothetical. She knows. Verse 26, and Judah acknowledged them and said, she hath been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not to Shelah my son, and he knew her again no more. So Judah knows that he's the guilty party, and he confesses. He spares Tamar's life. We just saw he wanted her burnt. So he's saving her life here. But then this also shows us that once he knew this was his daughter-in-law, the relationship ends. It doesn't continue on. That was the end of it. Verse 27, and it came to pass in the time of her travail, that behold, twins were in her womb. Now this should already be reminiscent to us of Jacob and Esau. We keep seeing these twins coming up. We can even go back to Cain and Abel. We keep seeing this throughout Genesis. 28. And it came to pass when she travailed, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, this came out first. So we have the hand come out, a scarlet thread is tied around the wrist, saying that he's the one that comes first. Verse 29. And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out, and she said, how hast thou broken forth? This breach be upon thee. Therefore his name was called Pharez. You may also see it translated Perez. Verse 30. And afterward came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zerah, or Zara. Now Zara, with the scarlet thread around his hand, would be the beginning of what's called the people of the red hand. So by studying the history of these people, we can track part of the tribes of Israel as they're scattered across the world. We see this, I have a verse here from Deuteronomy. This Deuteronomy 28:64. And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from the one end of the earth even unto the other, and there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. So the Bible tells us these tribes of Israel are going to be scattered all across the world, right? Now, we're done with that chapter, but we're not quite done with this lesson. We got a little bit we've got to go over here. We've got a couple other verses we'll hit, but I'll have them on the sides. So if you want to close up your Bible, you can, or if you want to flip with me. But let's think about what we know. What are the two symbols that are associated with Judah and his tribe and the Jewish people? Does anyone know the answer offhand? The lion and the Star of David. We're in agreement on that? The two symbols of Judah, the lion and the Star of David. Put that in the back of your mind and hold on to it. It's going to be important in a minute. Okay? So for at least 1,500 years before the coming of the Saxons into Britain, the two symbols of Zerah, Judah, Zerah, the son that had the scarlet thread tied around his wrist. The two emblems of Zerah Judah branch of the tribe of Judah was the chief emblems of the British Isles, the red hand in Ireland, and the rampant red lion in Britain. Now, the fact that the use of the rampant red lion as a clan and family emblem is found in Scotland indicates that many of the Scottish people are descended from Zerah Judah. Now, when Jacob, who also know him as Israel, gave his dying blessing to his 12 sons, he associated each of them with some animal, object, or personal characteristics, which afterwards became the emblem of the tribe descended from him. So we'll see this as we get a little bit further in the Old Testament. We'll get to these verses that lay out these symbols. But among these, the lion, the emblem of Jacob's fourth son, Judah, is of special importance, okay? Now for Judah, the whole tribe, the lion is in a lying down position, and that was their emblem. Later, with the addition of a crown, it became the emblem of the royal house and the throne of Judah. It then became the symbol of a two-tribe house and kingdom of Judah in a rampant. Rampant means standing on its hind legs with its four legs up. We probably know this posture, and we'll take a look at it. But now, the lion is not the only emblem of the descendants of Judah. And it's not even the only lion. So, as we saw in the last four verses of Genesis 38 there, Tamar gave birth to the twins. They're both fathered by Judah. And, of course, Judah being Jacob or Israel's fourth son. Now, this is one of the most important events recorded in Bible history. The births of many other people are recorded in the Bible, but in this case, we are giving some seemingly small details. Why are we giving these details? Why was it important that we know that his hand came out and we tied this cord around his hand and it was red and now he's returned back and then Perez comes out and so he's the firstborn now? Why is this particular birth singled out for such special attention? Well, the birth was a matter of great and special significance because Judah's other sons could not inherit the prophetic promise that from his descendants would come the royal family of Israel, eventually leading to Christ. Going back to the mixing with the Canaanites. His half-Canaanite sons could not be this lineage. So they were the children of a forbidden union. Their mother was a Canaanite. Therefore, with the oldest of these two boys destined to be the ancestor of the future royal family of Israel, of Zerah and Perez, those that came from Tamar, the question of which of them was born first, and therefore the heir, was a matter of very great importance. And it was also, as the Bible shows, the beginning of some serious family trouble. In the record of the birth, we find that the hand of Zerah appeared first, and that the midwife tied a scarlet thread or cord around his wrist, saying, "This came out first." We then read that the hand was withdrawn, and then the birth of Perez followed. So here's that seed of that family discord. Which boy was the firstborn, and therefore the heir, the promised line through which Christ would come? Is it Zerah that had the scarlet cord tied around his wrist, and the midwife literally said, "This came out first"? Or is it Perez whose birth was actually completed first? Now eventually, Perez was declared the rightful heir. And from him descended the official branch of the tribe of Judah and the Davidic royal house. This would be the bloodline that Christ ends up coming through. Now, how did Zerah and his descendants react to that? They undoubtedly would have considered themselves robbed of their inheritance. Now, the fact that they did not accept this ruling and that many of them left Israel during the time of bondage in Egypt will become clear when we look at some of the tribal genealogies in the Old Testament. So the Old Testament records the lineage of Pharaoh's Judah for a very long period of time. But the record of the descendants of Zerah Judah apparently end with the third generation. Now I have here on the side, we'll see these genealogies in Genesis 46, Numbers 26, 1 Chronicles 9, and Nehemiah 11. Now these genealogies were kept with great care, so any omission would indicate that those that are missing from those lineages were no longer in the land when the records were made. Now as the genealogy of Zerah Judah stops with the third generation, we assume that most, if not all, of Zerah's descendants must have left during the time of the captivity in Egypt, before the Exodus. This happens before the Exodus, okay? So we have the brother of the lineage that Christ comes through, they're just gone. So where did they go? Now, we talked about their symbols. Since the descendants of Judah, they were the descendants of Judah, their emblem was a lion. Now, it's very unlikely that they would want to give up the emblem of their identity. Even if they had resentment to the rest of the tribe of Judah, they would want to keep that lion as their emblem. But they added their own variations to show that they were separate and distinct from the tribe of Judah and Israel. So what they done, remember, the tribe of Judah had a lion that was laying down. They still wanted to use the lion, but they made it rampant and red. They had it stand on its hind legs, and they turned it red. So the rampant red lion became an emblem of the Zerah branch of the tribe of Judah. Now, let's go back to Genesis 38, verse 28. And we'll see another emblem that they used here. This was one of the last verses we looked there. And it came to pass, when she travailed, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound his hand upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, this came out first. So here we have an emblem that is absolutely unique, one that can apply to no one else, and one that we actually see recorded throughout history. A hand that is red from the blood of birth, circled by a scarlet thread or cord. Okay, so a red hand, or a red hand circled by a scarlet thread, also became an emblem of the Zerah branch of the tribe of Judah. Now, as we've discussed, the descendants of Zerah Judah, or most of them, decided to leave their brethren and flee Egypt to some new land or lands where they could establish independent kingdoms of their own. Now, they divided into 2 or more groups and then fled across the Mediterranean Sea from Egypt in different directions. Now, one of these groups was led by Calcol, C-A-L-C-O-L, Calcol. He's a descendant of Zerah and Judah, and we'll see that in 1 Chronicles 2:6. So I have the verse here so we can take a look at it on the slide. And he's the basis of the myth of Cecrops. Just one moment, guys. So again, it's Calcol, and he's the myth of Cecrops, and he shows up in Greek mythology. And give me just one second. Let me get this pulled up so we can take a look at this slide together here. So 1 Chronicles 2:6, and the sons of Zerah, this is his son, Zimri and Ethan and Heman and Calcol, that's the one we're talking about now, and Dara, 5 of them in all. So this is 1 Chronicles 2:6. So we see these things in the Bible that we're talking about. Now, Calcol and his group fled to Greece and founded the city of Athens. Okay, so this is the beginning of the city of Athens. So not long before the Exodus, Gethalus, he's also called Miled, a son of Calcol, returns to Egypt after killing a man. He's on the run and he goes back to Egypt. And after assisting one of the pharaohs in his fight against the Ethiopians, Gethalus is given the hand of the pharaoh's daughter, Skoda. Okay, so he's married to Skoda. And after living 7 years in Egypt, Gethalus fled the land at the outset of the plague. So when the plague started, Gethalus and Skoda left and traveled westward to a land that we know now as Spain, where they settled for a couple of years. Now, during their time in Spain, Gethalus and his people founded a city which still bears the name of their ancestor Zara, and it's called Zaragoza, Spain. You can look this up to this day. This city is still called Zaragoza, named after Zerah, of this lineage from Judah. Okay? Now, these descendants of Zara were Hebrews, right? So they're descended through Abraham through Eber, E-B-E-R, and wherever they traveled, they left this name like a footprint, like a thumbprint on it, marking their journey to distant lands. So if you go to Zaragoza, Spain, still to this day, the rivers on the banks there of Zaragoza is called the Ebro, E-B-R-O, the Ebro River in Spain. And the land itself, they actually named Iberia, the land of the Hiberi, or Hebrews. So we have this city founded in Spain with a river that is named after their ancestors. So then after residing in Spain, Gethalus died, and his widow Skoda, along with her sons, headed north to the island that we now call Ireland, and eventually founded Scotland. That's where you get that S-C-O-T. Scotland comes from Skoda, S-C-O-T-A. She is the namesake of the land of Scotland. And they also called this new home Heberland, or Hibernia, and the islands of north of it, the Hebrides, all meaning the lands of the Hebrews. So then these descendants of Zerah Judah founded the kingdom of Ulster shortly after the Exodus, and from that time until now, the emblem of Ulster has been a red hand circled with a scarlet cord. Now, with the division of Ireland in 1920, the official arms of Northern Ireland show a red hand without the scarlet cord. But this doesn't change the fact that it descended from Ulster. And the red hand is found in the arms of several of the old families, and in those of at least 14 of the clan chiefs in Scotland. So by their use of the red hand, some of the people of Scotland also point to their Israelite origins as descendants of that Zerah branch of the tribe of Judah. So we should note that the descendants of Zerah Judah, the first settlers in Ulster, were also entitled to use of the rampant red lion. Again, Judah, that lion, using that red lion. And in the official arms of Northern Ireland, we see that it still holds an important place. Now, another point of interest is that the red hand has its background as a six-pointed star, which resembles the Star of David. Told you, remember their symbols were the lion and the star. So now we have that red hand with the Star of David behind it. So we should know that's pointing us back to the Hebrews and where they came from. Now, again, in 1 Chronicles 2:6, we saw those names. There's one more I want you to look there. It says, and Dara, D-A-R-A, that last one. Okay, in the margin notes of some Bibles, it's spelled Darda, D-A-R-D-A, and the Jewish historian Josephus calls him Dardanus. Now, this is significant because this group, which he led, went northward across the Mediterranean Sea to the northwest corner of what we call Asia Minor. Now, there under the rule of Dara, they established a kingdom later called Troy. And on the southern shore is a narrow body of water that's called the Dardanelles. Still to this day, it carries Dara's name on it. So that's how we see this place of Troy being set up by Hebrews. Now, hundreds of years later, this kingdom's destroyed in a war with the Greeks. Some of us probably remember this, right? Helen of Troy. So the Hebrews founded Troy, that eventually is where we see that conflict take place. Now then, some of the survivors after that period fled north into Europe with their emblems. The rampant red lion appearing as the symbol of some of the nations, or the families of old, and then going up to bordering the North Sea. So until the coming of the Saxons in South Britain, in England, a rampant red lion was the symbol of all Britain. So with the coming of the Saxons, they actually did away with this. We see that at least 20 of the Scottish clan emblems contain a rampant red lion, and the rampant red lion emblem also appeared in the heraldry of the Netherlands. I just have two things I want us to look at here. That flag is the modern-day royal banner of Scotland. You see that rampant red lion? Still to this day, that symbol is there. This is the flag of Northern Ireland to this day. We see a red hand on the Star of David, surrounded by a scarlet thread. Still to this day. Now, I took you on a crazy historical journey here, right? Why is this important? Why did we go through this? If we can show the lineage of Zara historically down to Ireland to this day, then it's pretty safe that we can be confident in the existence of Pharis, who is the direct ancestor of Jesus. So this helps us prove and ground our faith. If we can prove this brother existed down to modern day flags that we still use, why would we not believe that the other side of this lineage existed down to our Messiah and Savior, Jesus Christ, right? And at the end of the day, all of these puzzle pieces fall into place for one reason: God's love for us, and that he wants us to be with him for eternity. This is 1 John 4:7. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. And in 1 John 4:8, he that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. So Genesis 38 is a glimpse into the brokenness of Judah, Joseph's brother, and how God will work even in uncomfortable places. Judah, one of Jacob's sons, he fails morally and spiritually. He breaks promises. He uses a harlot who turns out to be his daughter-in-law in disguise. He shows no intention of keeping God's law and protecting his family. And Tamar, who's marginalized and mistreated, takes action to claim justice on her own. And surprisingly, her story becomes part of the lineage of Christ. We see that in Matthew chapter 1, verse 3. So we see two sons of Judah slain for the failure to follow God's plan and will. But let us remember that that plan is to save their eternal souls through Jesus. This had to take place. And even though we may face God's judgment, and even though sometimes that means facing tough love, never forget that it is through his love, mercy, grace, and sacrifice that we will be able to have eternal life.